Good morning, everyone. Good to see you. My name is Mark Nelson. I'm actually a fiscal representative and negotiator on behalf of the Csiimkarmats First Nation and Trondheim here in the Yukon. So I've been involved in the fiscal policy process for several years and involved in the social well-being side of things and the data project here. So that's why I'm here to give you a little bit of a background on that and a first kind of tour of the toolkit, very high level. So I'm going to jump to the next slide, please. Okay. I bet a lot of you are familiar with this process, but just a quick recap that this is something that we've been working on since 2016 when the new incoming Liberal government committed to redoing its fiscal policy on funding self-government, to do it in collaboration, and to take a principled approach to funding Indigenous governments. So we say SGIGs here at the national level, self-governing Indigenous governments. And so there's a whole bunch of working groups in this fiscal policy process, and the data steering committee is one of those working groups as a side project that we've been overseeing the work of the toolkit and webinars. So next slide, please. So back in 2018, December 2018, I think, the SGIGs in Canada came to agreement on the text and language for a new fiscal policy document that came to be known as the Green Book, because I think the color of the cover when it's first printed, but it seems like a pretty good name. And one really unique piece of this policy is that it recognizes that SGIGs, of course, have all these ongoing responsibilities that come from their treaties as governments. So things like governance, running lands and resources, and infrastructure and housing, and all that kind of thing. It also recognizes that SGIGs have a role, maybe lead role, in supporting the well-being of their citizens. And in the section called socioeconomic equity, and ensuring that there is equity with SGIG citizens and other Canadians, and if there are gaps in areas that SGIGs have a responsibility to support their communities to help try and address them. So part of that data is really key to understanding those gaps, to tracking them over time, and to making decisions about what kind of programs or initiatives you might want to put into place as SGIGs. Next slide, please. So it was recognized pretty early on that in order to do that really well, that the SGIGs needed some supports in place to really get data working for them, to embrace putting, I guess, a data regime, you might say, into place, and really, instead of having data used by others for whatever their farming is saying, it's really to be able to simplify the and to support data sovereignty and capacity that's needed to do that. So, the idea, the initial thinking was a lot around IT systems, honestly, and then people quickly realized that, well, IT systems are just one tiny piece, right? It's really about the whole governance system around data, about community vision and principles and all that kind of thing as well. So that led to the idea of a toolkit. So next slide, please. And the idea that we needed to develop a toolkit that had a bit more covered all that ground that needed to support data sovereignty and data governance management. And then a learning series to roll that all out so that it wasn't just sitting on e-shelf gathering dust. So we're here today to talk about the webinars. There is an intention here for some post-webinar data meetups to allow people to come together and talk about the toolkit content and have some facilitated sessions there, and really to dig into their experience on the ground and get support. And also there's the opportunity for some expert advisory sessions, which we'll come back to later. We have a few folks that we've recruited as potential expert advisors, and we're going to get them to introduce really how you navigate the toolkit, and this kind of shows you the lay of the land. So if you click on any one of these areas, you'll be able to see what's in those sections, and myself and Allison and Jen are going to walk you through that a bit right now. So there's some background on why it's needed and a bit about the SGIG data project. I've already touched on those. In how to use, I'll just say a bit about actually navigating the toolkit. So you'll see this little swirl diagram on the side that has different elements of data governance and management. And as you go through the toolkit on the different pages, the diagram is there, and one of those will be highlighted to show you what part that section is dealing with. So we've got foundational elements like visions, principles, objectives, and Gwen's going to talk a bit about that after. Data governance, data management, acquiring and analyzing. Along the side, if you go to each page, I'll show you another example here. So in this page that talks about data governance and management here, it shows you where the foundations. And along the side, you'll also see links to the same sections that are under the pull-down menus up at the top, so you can navigate to those. So if you want to look at Indigenous approaches to data and evaluation, you can click on that. You'll see throughout we have some pull-down menus with read more, some different case studies if you don't type the boxes. I'll say a bit here just about case studies and then hand off to Allison. We have different case studies throughout the toolkit. Some of them are real examples, and some of them are fictional ones. And for that, we came up with a fictional Indigenous government, and we looked for a name for it, and the Nunatsiavut government here gave us this one, Sirlimintuk. I'm probably not saying that very well, but that's referring to like a fictional or made-up idea. So this is an example that we use throughout. You'll see here when you click on these case studies, it opens up in a different tab for you. So some real case studies and some that are using our made-up Indigenous government here. Okay, I'm going to turn to Allison here.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Butler, and I've been providing coordination support to the data project. So I'll share my screen. Okay, so the data governance section of the website sort of goes over some of the laws and policies and decision-making frameworks that you might want to have in place for overseeing data management. So the first page here is your data governance framework. This page links to a great template that the BC First Nations Data Governance Initiative put together. So the governance framework document is a document that outlines your governance structures and the processes and policies and legislation that you have in place to govern your data. So this page just introduces some of the key components that are in that template that the BC FNDGI has put together. So vision, principles, and objectives, so governance structures, what structures will you have in place to guide decision-making about your data, and who will be in the decision-making roles, and what support staff will you have in place to support data. Another key component is accountability mechanisms. So how will decision makers and support staff show that they're meeting their responsibilities? Another component is policy documents. So what policies do you have in place to manage your data? Legal instruments, so that's legislation that your government has in place that impacts data. And then the last component of the template is key relationships and partners. The next page we have in this section is on legislation and the duty of privacy protection. So privacy is a really important part of data management when it comes to socioeconomic data. So this page has some principles of privacy protection, and then it has some information about different types of legislation that will impact your data. So we have some introductory information on the page, and then we also have a downloadable document here with more information. So the focus here is really on privacy and access to information legislation, which a number of SGIGs already have in place. So there's links to the SGIGs that have privacy and access to information laws in place, and also some information in the download about key components of that legislation. We also link to provincial, territorial, and federal privacy and access to information legislation, and provide some information about how that might impact the data that you are able to access from those other governments. We also touch on statistics legislation and human rights legislation, which might impact how you use the data in your decision making. The next page in this section is contracts and agreements. This just provides some information about different types of agreements that you might have in place around data. And then we have a page on data sharing. So if you're sharing the government's data with another organization, or vice versa, another organization is sharing data with you, then you want to have an agreement in place. So this page links to different templates. And the last section, or page in this section, is standards and best practices. So we haven't uploaded this document yet, but it will be added soon, and just talks about different external standards and best practices. So I'll turn it over to Jen now for the data management section.
Hi, everybody. So I'm just going to share my screen here. So my name is Jennifer Jansen, and I'm the Information Management Coordinator for the Tsawwassen First Nation here in BC. And I'm just going to walk you through a bit about the data management section of the toolkit. So data management is about, or focused on, when you've acquired the data, how do you take care of it? How do you make sure that you can use it? How do you make sure that it's accurate? And then how do you protect it? So the landing page here, we talk a little bit about some of the basic concepts of sort of day-to-day data management. One thing that I'll point out here is the data life cycle. So this graphic represents sort of the flow. The center circle represents sort of the flow of how, as you gather data and use it, the sort of work processes that it will go through in the organization. And then the background puzzle pieces represent those ongoing things that are sort of always in place in the background that support your data management activities. We have a section on information technology, a little bit about IT systems, and how to evaluate whether or not an IT system is the right one for your organization. Some of how to evaluate what the full cost of adopting a new IT system might be, how to make a business case for that. One of the things that we have been asked is that people are expecting to see a list of vendors or a list of products, and we actually have chosen not to do that purposely because those lists tend to get outdated very quickly. Vendors buy other vendors, systems get amalgamated into other systems, they change names, companies change names, and that happens really, really fast, and it's very difficult to keep a list like that up to date. We also are not wanting the toolkit to be seen as endorsing any particular product or solution. So what we wanted to focus on was more on how to see what is available for you and how to evaluate what what is available, what might actually be the best fit for your organization. Because just because a system works for one organization doesn't mean it will necessarily work well for another. So that's the IT section. Then we have a section on data quality, which is just about how to make sure that your data is good data, that it's accurate, and that when you use it and report out on it, that the information that you're reporting out is accurate. We have a section on storage and backup, so some better practices and best practices on how to guard your data, safeguard your data, make sure that it's protected, so that you don't lose it, and so that it's accessible and that it can be accessed and used over the long term. And then finally, a section on data security and privacy, which talks about how to implement some of the concepts that are introduced in the data governance, the privacy concepts that are introduced in the data governance section. This section talks more about how to actually implement some of those best practices and how to ensure that you are your organization is maintaining privacy in a good way. So that is the data management section, and I will turn it back over to Mark for the next section.
Okay. So this is the acquiring and working with data section. And I should say, going back to Harmony's comments right at the start, where she went over the term data and talked about qualitative and quantitative data, right? Quantitative data being numbers stuff, qualitative data being stuff you can't really put numbers on, right? But it's still important data nonetheless. So qualitative or quantitative, in this case, might be number of people who are using traditional medicines, at least once a month. Whereas, qualitative data might be like people's thoughts about traditional medicine or their attitudes towards traditional medicine, right? So that's all really important to remember, and that when we talk about acquiring and working with data, that there's lots of data out there in the world about Indigenous people that other governments, other agencies have that is really important to be able to access. There's also, and a lot of that tends to be more the quantitative data, some qualitative, but also Indigenous communities have their own data as well, both quantitative and qualitative information from their community that might be those kind of statistics, but it might be different kinds of information too. It's important to be able to work with all of that. I will say one thing we forgot to mention at the start was that because this toolkit, we talked about the fiscal policy and well-being, it's tended to focus around socioeconomic data and about people. And some of the tools and ideas in the toolkit could certainly work for other kinds of data, like say data about the landscape, about salmon or other animals or habitat. We also know that kind of information has some unique needs as well, like people who work in resource stewardship and GIS systems and mapping. They know that kind of data has its own unique needs as well. And so far the toolkit is mostly focused on the people data. So a lot of it might still apply to those other kinds of data. I just wanted to make that clear. So this section gets into talking about data and the importance of indicators. So some guidance there that I think Gwen is going to talk a little bit more about that in her work. Just going to look at the external data sources section here. So some case studies, and then we're in the process of providing a bit more access and survey of all the data sources that are available and out there nationally as well as regionally with provinces and territories. That's coming soon. Some other links here. So looking at data analysis here, I wanted to show you. So we've got these pull-down menus. I'm not sure if we mentioned that as we go through it, there's these underlying terms, and if you hover over them, it'll show you the definition from our glossary there, so you can see those. Some of these areas, we have downloadable resource documents, and those are also listed at the side of each page. This one shows you that there's 3 downloadable documents in this page. So I've got one of descriptive statistics here. The link is also over on the right. So when you click on that, it'll take you to the downloadable document. That's coming up right away. So this one gets into some real nitty-gritty on that data analysis work and on reporting and learning from that data and how to tell stories with that data and to put it to work for you in your community. So that's the lay of the land on that page, and I'm going to turn it back to Jen to talk about capacity.
Thanks, Mark. I need you to stop sharing. Okay, so the building capacity section, let's go back to the main page here. The building capacity section is the people side of data governance and data management. So this section deals with how to provide capacity amongst your staff in your organization to do this work, and that can include identifying and hiring new positions within the organization, providing training to your existing staff to help them build this. So the staffing section talks about some of the functions that an organization may have internally that related to data governance and data management that you may want to consider adding some of these functions to your organization. In the training section, we talk about there are some links on where to get training, and that could be training that are sort of specific to data usage and sort of the technical side of training, and also can be more foundational training related to information management, information governance. For capacity support, we've provided some links on external opportunities to get either funding or to other resources, find consultants and contact professional associations who may be able to help you on your journey with data governance and data management. In the working with researchers section, we talk about sort of the ethical codes that third-party researchers would have to abide by, and some of those things that you should consider if you are engaging with researchers at a university or another kind of academic institution or something like that. And then the last section is the change management. This is one, and it's still in development, but this is one that often gets overlooked if you're implementing new IT systems or implementing new processes to gather and work with data sets. One of the things to remember is that you're actually changing how people do their jobs. You're changing sort of the flow of their work. And so it's important to support that, and it's important to provide support to frontline staff and senior, executive level decision makers to help with that transition towards a new way of doing things. It's not just about training on how to use an IT system. It's about looking at how your organization actually works and how information moves across your organization. And when you're changing that, you need to understand how it works now so that you can identify the best way to make it more effective and more efficient and make it easier for people to do their jobs. Because ultimately what we want to do is make sure that particularly frontline staff that that it's easier for them to do their job and to get the information that they need. We don't want to make it harder. We don't want to add more work to their day. So that's the change management system. And that's basically the toolkit. So I will stop sharing and turn it back over to Harmony.
I think I'm handing it back to Mark. Introduce the advisors. Am I right or am I wrong?
Yeah. Potato. Okay. So that's the lay of the land in the toolkit. Just a quick thing before I ask our expert advisors here to introduce themselves. So as it says, this is in beta launch format. This is really the first version. We'll be doing work in the coming months to beef up certain sections and to tweak it. And I should mention at the bottom here along this bar that stays in each page that you look at the toolkit, you'll have this bar here, and it has links to the resources, case studies, the glossary, and also this section to provide feedback. So please do, because the data steering committee will still be active and working